Hey everyone, welcome to the 261st episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a really good show for you this week. We are going to be starting off with robots. They're the new hotness thanks to COVID-19. We're also going to look at how some countries are using IoT to track COVID-19 and some rule changes at the FDA that will help with this. There is a Russian botnet that we're going to talk about. We're talking about the weaponization of IoT insecurity. We're going to do a little segment on racist voice assistants. Also, confidentiality when you have smart speakers in your home. And I bought a really cheap fitness pack from Wyze. Plus, Kevin and I are introducing a new segment thinking about the world we want to live in, assuming that it does not go back to normal. So we're going to be talking about, this week, privacy in medical devices. And we've got a couple other news bits. Plus, our guest this week is Josh Datko, who is a co-founder and chief engineer at Cryptotronics. He is going to talk about a subject near and dear to your hearts, namely separating your IoT devices onto a separate network. Plus, he's going to give us lots of definitions about secure enclaves, TPMs, TEEs, and more. It's all about embedded versus IT security. So stay tuned for that because while a little wonky, everyone needs to know a little bit about security. We'll also hear from our sponsor, Machine Q. This is their last week, so yay, thanks Machine Q. And now, let's go to a message from another one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is LiveWorks. LiveWorks is the definitive event for digital transformation. But in light of the global coronavirus pandemic, LiveWorks 2020 has been reimagined as a complimentary virtual event. So you can enjoy an inspiring new digital format this year without the risk of travel. You can have remote participation from anywhere in the world. Plus, I will be speaking at the event and would love for you to join me. Visit LiveWorks, LiveWorks.com for more information. All right, Kevin, this is probably not a surprise to any of us, but robots and automation are the new hotness because we're not running out of people, but it's harder to...
But people aren't running out either.
Yes. Good job, Kevin.
I don't call it coronavirus anymore. I call it stay-at-home-virus.
There you go, stay-at-home-virus. So what we've got is a lot of funding and anecdotal evidence from companies who are building robots. So last week, a company in Austin, Texas called Diligent Robotics, they make a robot for hospitals. And I actually have talked to the company before. I love them. This is a robot that does things that nurses normally do, but nurses probably shouldn't have to do, like get more blankets and try to restock supplies and that sort of thing. So they raised $10 million. Yay for them. We're also seeing anecdotal evidence that Amazon is seeing an increase in demand for its Madam A-inspired call center software. So voice recognition for call centers because their call center workers aren't coming in. And lots of people need assistance right now, like canceling flights.
Yeah, I've seen an uptick in chatbots as well that take care of some of the early screening for whether it's COVID-19 symptoms or, you're calling your credit card company for an extension, et cetera. So it's happening on all fronts.
Yeah. And the Brookings Institution, so think science and think formal research, they put out a report that talks about the cyclical nature of automation, how in downturns during the 3 recessions in the last 30 years, a whopping 88% of job losses took place in routine automatable occupations. So basically, during a crisis, things that can be automated will be. What's interesting here is we're trying to figure out, given how far robots have come and how far automation has come, where will we see that automation? It's going to be mostly low-income workers, people who are doing routine occupations, so things in production, food service, and transportation.
It's low-skill type things, I would think.
I wouldn't say it's low skill because there's definitely like a skill to chopping an onion, right? Like if you do that as a sous chef, that's a skill, but it's also a skill that a robot can master. So I think it's things that are easily repeatable. I've gotten several pitches in the last few weeks from companies around the world talking about their orders being up for automated drones, for example, robots in factories, and for delivery robots. So those little funky robots that you see tootling around, most of those are still experimental, but they're starting to see their pilot projects get fast forwarded just in the last week or two.
Yes, I saw a small robot delivering Charmin toilet paper online a couple days ago.
Man, I was going to say, did you attack it and take the toilet paper? Because apparently that's a hot commodity. Anyway, you're like, no, I would not attack a robot. But people probably will.
No, robots are my friends. I don't attack robots.
If you're investing in or looking at companies that are building robots, yay.
Of course, this always raises the question, okay, so the robots are coming to take all the jobs. And I don't fully believe that's true, although that's a valid concern. And this is kind of why I said low-skilled type activities, although you're right, it's not just low-skilled. But my take is, if you're in a job right now where there's a very repeatable process that could easily be automated in the future, as an individual, I'd be looking to boost my skills, is what I would do.
Yes. And what historically has been the case, especially in the slow run for automation, is what you see is the robots take the crappy jobs and a person is able to do more person-able jobs. So a good example is actually right in your neck of the woods. There's the robot at the giant supermarkets that cleans up spills.
1 mile away, yes.
So what's happened there is the giant runs around looking for spills, mops up the spills. So an employee does not have to do that.
Because cleaning up the aisle, mopping the aisle, isn't make the giant make more money. They could be checking people out. They could be, individuals could be recommending foods or
answering
whatever.
Questions about where things are. Yes.
Exactly.
So, but what does happen is eventually you do need fewer people, but it's usually a slower, more gradual process. So giant may be like, oh, now that I have this robot, I can hire one fewer person. What happens when everybody's at home and you automate more things? Maybe that is a faster progression. So look for ways that you're adding to the bottom line beyond your repeatable skill set.
Exactly.
Let's talk about tracking the coronavirus, which is responsible for COVID-19.
This is something that's happening quite a bit outside of the U.S. And I'm not obviously a doctor, but my opinion is that having this type of data, trackable health data at a nationwide level, has definitely helped those countries flatten the curve faster, I guess is the best way to say it. So a couple of examples, and actually Axios has written these up in an article saying why we'll never have that here in the U.S. In Taiwan, they've got geofencing, virtual fences, basically to enforce quarantines by using phones.
So what happens there? Is it QR codes? Like I would scan a QR code to try to leave the zone and it would...
So yeah, in Taiwan, basically the nationwide system is using the phone GPS to see where everybody is. Again, that's not something we would want here in the U.S., even though that probably is happening behind the scenes. But the system in Taiwan will alert police and local officials if people move away from their geofenced area of their home, or if they even turn off their phones.
Ooh, scary.
Yes. That's a pretty hefty quarantine there.
Okay. And I believe in Israel, they're also using it, and some other countries in Europe also using similar tracking and geofencing.
And in fact, Singapore has basically a contact tracing app, which is interesting because my wife and I were talking about this because half of what we have, I think I even mentioned this on the last week's show, if you use Google Maps and allow for your location to be fully tracked all the time, it knows where you are. And if everybody used that, you could kind of extrapolate who's come in contact with who. But in Singapore, they actually do have a contact tracing mobile app. And they've open sourced it for developers around the world. Again, don't think we'll have that here.
Yeah. So the issues here are many. We are a freedom-loving people, very individual, makes sense. I would say, though, that we might actually get that sort of phone-level tracking. I think that might be a next step. If that's the case, though, I would really want a couple, safeguards in place. One is, making it opt-in is not going to work, right? So if they're going to do it, I think they should tell us that they're doing it, one. Two, that data should only be used for the period of the lockdown, right? So
Yes.
like my state is under a shelter in place order right now. Kevin, is yours?
Yes.
So if we're saying, hey, everyone needs to shelter in place, and to help enforce this, we're going to track your phone. Yes, people could leave without their phones. Man, that would be such a struggle. Sorry, I'm just thinking about that. I'm like, woo, take your phone, not. And then all of that data gets flushed immediately when the shelter in place orders come up.
And I would say legally can only be allowed for this one single purpose during this time.
Right. And this could be a one-time special dispensation. This cannot be like a new law.
But see, and that's where people will rightfully be leery and say, well, what's to stop the government from turning it into a full-time thing? Or once you give a power away or you give your data away, you've lost control of it. That's the concern, I think.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what happened with the Patriot Act post 9/11, right? We had a crisis. We implemented some pretty draconian security rules, and then they're still here. That's what we really want to avoid, because the potential for always on surveillance, given our phones, given facial recognition and the preponderance of cameras all around, and given the fact that we've stuck Madam A and other devices in our home, mean that you really do have the chance to get a very clear picture of someone's movements everywhere all the time. And that's beyond frightening.
I think there are ways to do that. I know we're going to talk later in the show about some of them. So I would say there might be a middle ground.
Yes, we're going to talk about how to make that in our new segment, talking about the world we want to live in. But first, we have to talk about a Russian botnet because, my goodness.
Does it use Telnet?
It doesn't say.
Of course not.
Okay, this is a story that really took place a couple years ago, but now we're seeing the documentation from it. So this is important. What this is a security story, and the wrinkle here is that the Russian Federal Security Service, so it's Russia's FBI, KGB,
it's FSB.
It's called the FSB. It is what is it? It's not the precursor, it's the postcursor. What is that word? It's the postcursor to the KGB, the successor to the KGB.
Yes.
So this is an organization that, because I'm an American who grew up when we were still like huddling under our desks in case of a nuclear bomb, I'm like, oh, the FSB, it's so bad. It's
like that show, The Americans.
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's when I grew up. Okay. So what the FSB has done is they created their own IoT botnet called Fronton? I don't know. I have no surreal.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it. Fronton, maybe.
Yes. Give us your best Russian accent and say it.
Fronton.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So what's notable here isn't yet another IoT botnet. It is that this was weaponized and created by a nation state, which is a very real threat with both IoT and the current security landscape. So we're seeing a lot of nation states take advantage of cyber attacks because they work and we have so much more online. And by combining it with IoT, we're creating a huge attack surface that is almost impossible to secure. These really focused on the Fronton, focused on DVRs and network cameras because they wanted both a camera, the ability to look in on someone is great, but also because these things are notoriously old and insecure. So
they took great pains to really hide this because typically your botnet's just going to gather data and it's going to quietly send data back to server somewhere, etc. These actually do it over a range of VPNs.
Oh, yeah.
So that it's even harder to detect the traffic, what's in the traffic, where's it coming from, where's it going to. That's rather scary.
Yeah, well, it's war. I guess it's a Cold War. Cold cyber war. Okay. Let's talk about racists. In this case, this would be from Russians to racists. Stanford has put out a study that looked at voice recognition tools from Apple, Amazon, Google, IBM, and Microsoft. They used them to transcribe interviews with 42 white people, 73 black people, and all of this took place in the US. And the tool basically, they did a worse job understanding black people. 19%
by a large degree, in fact.
By a large, yeah. They misunderstood white people about 19% of the time, and they misunderstood black people 35% of the time. They found 2% of audio snippets from white people to be unreadable, but 20% of those from Black people to be unreadable. And this, again, points to...
as good as the model.
Yeah. Racist. And no, I don't think people were intentionally being racist. But if you're not training on a wide set of data, you're going to end up with a racist algorithm.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing to see this. I mean, I don't think it was intentionally modeled this way. I don't think it's a racist thing, but race comes into this, as well as different locations of the country, in the U.S. anyway, because there are different accents. So you can typically tell when somebody comes from the Southeast. I grew up in Jersey. I don't know if I have a Jersey accent, but
you do not.
I get that. I get that. I worked hard to get rid of it. That's why. I get it. But what it means to me is there is so much more work to be done. And I hope that the powers that be, the companies behind this, really expand their data modeling capabilities to normalize this so that these work as well for somebody who is white, as well as a person of color, as well as a person who lives in the North versus the South.
And I would also say I was at an event. It was a UX event a few weeks ago. And as part of that, I attended a session. So the last half of the session on why is Siri white? And I really thought this was super interesting because the researcher was talking not about misunderstanding voice commands, but about how the inflection and the words they use are clearly white. And what that meant for other cultures trying to understand and talk to Siri or Madame A. And what we think of as neutral in this world, we have to remember, or neutral in this country, is not actually neutral. So giving you your little daily dose of, I guess, privilege awareness? I don't even know. But it is something to think about. And it would actually, again, it boils down to diverse training sets, diverse teams, building these things. So let's make it happen because we want, at a minimum, we want to sell to everybody, right?
Right. And you don't want a digital divide in the voice space based on something like this. I'm glad that they did the study. I'm disappointed that somebody like a Google, a Microsoft, and Apple themselves didn't do such a study.
Oh, that's true. Microsoft has done research on this, but yes. All right. Well, let's move on to another voice assistant story. This one is from Bloomberg, and it turns out that lawyers are being warned that, hey, your confidential client calls may not be so confidential if you have a digital or a smart speaker in the room.
Right, because a lot of lawyers are now taking these calls from home where they may have a Google Home or an Echo or whatever device they have. And yes, we already know they're always listening. And we also know that sometimes snippets are heard without the wake word. So
in like 19% of the cases, based on that study we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, see, this is why I think I've been saying it for about a week and a half now. The new normal, people need to get used to it. I'm not saying we're all going to stay at home and work forever and now we need to consider these things, but we need to consider these things regardless.
Yeah, and I will say, so as a reporter, when I'm talking to someone, I don't have my Echo. I have the microphones turned off on my devices. Sorry, I should say talking to someone in a sensitive situation. Although I am aware that like my phone I'm using to talk to them could be also listening to the conversation. So is it an ideal solution? No.
But you're aware of it and you're doing the best you can do.
Right. I mean, the best I can do is leave my phone behind and go meet someone like in a shadow, in a park by a bench where we sit side by side, not acknowledging each other, and then leave a message under a folded newspaper, just like in The Americans.
Yes. And you know, this, just because this came up the other day with a neighbor who was 6 feet away from me, I made sure of it. It's not just lawyers and that confidentiality. My neighbor came across the street to talk to me because she's a psychologist and she's now doing her sessions online through video chat. And she was asking me, what should I be using? How do I install this? I mean, there are a lot of technical questions, but here in the US, the HIPAA rules have been temporarily relaxed so that people like her can have confidential sessions with clients over Skype and FaceTime and other types of video services. But it's still, again, something people need to be aware of.
Yes. All right. While this virus is happening, I did a little online shopping. So for people who may not have been aware of it, Wyze has launched their Wyze Band and their Wyze Scale. And the Wyze Band...
outrageous prices, I must add.
Outrageously low prices, which we have come to expect from them. The Wyze Band is an activity tracker. It has several features you might want, but not the ones Kevin wants. Kevin, I'm guessing it's the lack of GPS and cellular connectivity that killed you here?
Those are two biggies for me. I really get a lot of value out of those from my Apple Watch. So yes, but I'm also probably ahead of the curve on that. So I think mainstream people will be very happy with what Wyze is offering.
So for those wondering, the Wyze Band will control your Wyze devices if you have them. It has Madam A built in. It has activity and heart rate tracking. It has phone notifications and a finder. And it is water resistant. And it has a color screen, which I've never had before. And it looks like a Fitbit Charge 3.
But it's not priced like one.
No, it is not. It is $24.99 plus $4.99 shipping. So, yay! To me, that is
amazing.
Nuts.
Yeah. Before Stacy ordered it, I guessed it would be about $49. And I said that their smart scale would be $20 higher than whatever the band is priced. So I was way off.
Yeah. It is real cheap. So, and it's going to last 10 to 14 days on a single charge with normal use. We'll see what that actually means.
I know you don't have it yet.
I don't, and I won't have it for a couple days. I may not have it for the next show.
Right. And that's okay. I'm curious because it's quote unquote Madam A built in if it needs to be connected to a phone for that to work.
Yes.
I assume it does.
It does not have a cellular modem in it.
Well, even over Wi-Fi, I would think maybe you could do it,
No, its battery life is too long.
Yeah,
it's Bluetooth. Okay. Sorry. It was like, here's a Q&A. How does the Wyze Band sync data? It connects with your phone over Bluetooth.
There you go.
La 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 la. Okay, so I purchased that, and then I also purchased the scale. You guys, I have glanced at smart scales in the past, and I have laughed at them because I'm not paying $100 when I could buy a $20 digital scale and be just fine. Well, with Wyze, I can get a $20 connected scale. I know, it's so ridiculous. So this is going to send all of my data both to the Wyze app, and if you just want the scale, because you're like $20 for a smart scale, so I don't have to track my weight manually, I'm in. It will talk to other services, including Fitbit and I believe Garmin, but this gives you a ridiculous number of metrics. It's going to tell me your weight, body fat, heart rate, your lean body mass, muscle mass, visceral fat. I don't want to know. It apparently will tell you also your basal metabolic rate, your bone mass, your metabolic age, your protein level, and your body water. I know body water is like how people detect body fat. So some of these are kind of like doubled up. Mm-hmm. And these sync with Apple Health, Google Fit, Fitbit. Oh, Fitbit's coming soon. So is Apple Health and Samsung Health. So today, when you buy it, it's only going to track with Google Fit.
So I have a Fitbit Aria scale that I bought, a couple of years back, and I'm sure it cost about $120, if not more. And it syncs over to Apple Health. And a lot of people are like, why do I need a smart scale? Well,
that's
aside from all those, and that's fair. Aside from all those metrics that you can get, to me, having the data synced over to a platform, an all-encompassing platform, and for me, that's Apple Health. I like seeing the trends, the long-term trends. And yeah, I know I could just enter my weight every day in an app, but I'm just lazy and I don't want to do that. I just want it to sync.
I just don't want a record of my weight anywhere. But hey, that's me. I should tell people the Wyze scale has a weight range from 11 to 400 pounds, which is 5 to 180 kilograms. Just so in case you're like, what if it only had to 200 pounds? Then we'd all be like, oh, that's terrible.
No, just buy two.
Oh, Lord.
One on each foot and add them up.
All right. Now, the Wyze scale is $19.99 plus $8.99 shipping. For the pre-order period, and right now these are in pre-order. I ordered mine as a beta member, so I'm not sure the timing on when this will be for everyone. But when mine come in, I will, of course, tell everybody all about them. And I will tell you how well I can control my Wyze cameras and whatnot and lights with. I don't know why I would want to control my camera on my wrist, but,
From the scale. Maybe you want to step on the scale and automate your lights.
If Stacy has lost 5 pounds, dance
Turn
party.
the lights green.
Right. No. Okay.
No.
So we know everybody here is a big Wyze fan, so we wanted to give that because, man, that is freaking cheap.
I still don't know how they are making money.
They are building the software platform, and they basically are willing to accept incredibly low margins.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all licensed from Chinese manufacturers, and they just run their software over it.
Right.
Okay. And next up, we have a new Kickstarter that we're excited about.
This is called Frame.IoT. It is an Arduino development kit for Wi-Fi projects. It's rather inexpensive, as you would expect. As soon as I say Arduino, you should think this is not expensive. The Kickstarter for this project recently started. There's still plenty of time left on this. It's 28 days to go. And you can pledge now for $39. You can get this little dev kit. Basically, you get the IoT board and 13 jumper pins. If you want to add a micro SD card, a battery, a small speaker, USB cable, you're going to pony up another $20. I can't say that there's anything unique about this compared to other dev kits, but it's got a little bit of a different footprint. It's very small, very square. Has a lot of different connections. So basically, it's got built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth that's running on the ESP32 chip. So, if you're into the hacking thing and you want to do some IoT stuff, I know they've got some software that works with if this, then that. So you could kind of create a little home automation server with this, although I wouldn't say you're going to run a massive amount of devices through this. And I say that based on the very wonderful comments I've gotten from listeners about the Home Assistant project saying you really need, the 4 gig of RAM on your Pi. You need this, you need that. So this is more of a prototyping tool.
Got it. All right. And final little story for us on this segment is Aura. We talked about them last week. This is the ring that is an activity tracker and a ring. It also tracks temperature, which is pretty rare in activity tracking devices. And the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center and the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, about 2,000 emergency medical workers there will wear the Aura rings to see if their temperature changes enough, and that's something that could be used to detect COVID-19. So basically, it's more validation for trying to figure out, hey, can we use the wearables that we have to help predict the spread of disease? In this case, COVID-19, which is a wonderful intro to our new segment, which is the world we want to live in. And Kevin and I were talking about how post-pandemic, the world is not going to go back to normal exactly. So we talked about robots at the top of the show. One of the ideas, and we're going to be doing this over the next couple of weeks, where we pick a topic and we try to, guide the world where we want it to go, knowing that it will change. So we're talking about privacy today in medical devices. This is a wonderful opportunity to boost telemedicine and remote monitoring devices through the smart home. And last week in the newsletter, I published a story about building a framework for that talked about needing to validate these remote monitoring solutions, needing to have them be secure and private, having data privacy policies that the user understands, being upfront about their costs and benefits, and also understanding how usable it is for everyone, not just tech smart people.
It's funny you use the word validation in this, because getting to the whole thought that things will never be quite the same after this and the new normal, it's probably going to be, it may vary by degree what's normal and what's new, but I do think things will change. I think what the situation has done, it has validated a lot of technologies that businesses were not using as much as they are now, such as telemedicine and video conferencing. I mean, the last time I was out of the house was over a week ago to pick up my daughter from college because they're done for the semester. It's all online learning, so she's on conference calls with her teachers. My wife is a secretary. She's on conference calls, video calls and such. You and I have been using this type of technology for years, but now it's proven that it's not scary. It does work. However, there's still some guidelines that we probably need to look at in terms of privacy and usage.
Yes. And we'll probably talk about remote work in another one of our segments. So stay tuned for that and send us your thoughts. Like, what should we be thinking about if that becomes the new normal? But in the privacy space, what Kevin and I are calling for is really a comprehensive focus on privacy. And I say this because right now it feels like we should just use what we have and who cares about privacy? But we don't have to. And privacy policies that take our health data, like for example, in a pandemic, right now, the way we're using it, maybe we don't have time to develop a robust privacy policy, but we do have time to say, hey, this data is only going to be used for medical purposes, for tracking a pandemic. So medical maybe in research purposes, not by the private company. So when Google's Verily put out their COVID-19 testing website, they didn't have to have a privacy policy that said that data would be shared with Google, right? They could have created a privacy policy that actually respected people's privacy. But it was a choice that the company made, probably because they didn't want to get rid of that data. They wanted to keep that data so they could learn from it and build other products later on. That's not evil, but when it comes to medical data, I think it's way better to be more conservative. So saying they donate that data to research, for example, in an anonymized format, might be a little bit more palatable to people.
Yeah, I was just going to say anonymized and aggregated as opposed to specific individual data. You know, like we talked earlier in the show about the in Taiwan, how they're having the geofencing by phone. That's at an individual level. And it's useful data. And if that's what they want to do, that's fine. I don't think the US really would go for that. But aggregating and anonymizing data, we already have gone for. I mean, and you can't say we haven't if you're a user of Google Maps or Apple Maps, because if you look at the traffic, you're looking at aggregated and anonymized data, and you're contributing to it.
Although, how anonymized is it really? But
well, that's a whole other question.
But the point is, if we want to live in a world with remote monitoring, quality telemedicine, where we have, our blood pressure cuffs that are connected and that sort of thing, we do need to build privacy in, because otherwise people won't trust it. So when we're recreating a new normal, and as we're embarking on this today, I really encourage companies and consumers and doctors not to just use what's available, but really to use the thing with the most privacy saving features and to call and demand for those. Some people may say that it's not the time for that. I disagree strongly.
Now's the perfect time.
It is the perfect time. And a company like Google, they can do this. It's not like they don't have the lawyers on staff to write a privacy policy that works for everyone and not just Google. So that is our new segment.
And that actually leads to some of the privacy changes that we've actually undergone in the past week or two.
Oh, that's right. The FDA on Friday said that they are going to allow the expanded use of devices to monitor patients' vital signs remotely. So this brings up a whole bunch of new options. The FDA did implement this without a comment period. So this is me commenting right now.
Here's your comment.
And Kevin, do you have anything more on this?
Yeah, I do, only because they were very specific about the types of devices.
Kinsa.
And they're also saying this is for
Kinsa.
remote monitoring of patients.
KINSA.
Which I kind of thought in general that was already acceptable, but now they're spelling it out for sure. And they've spelled out the device types, such as those that measure body temperature, respiratory rate, heart rate, and blood pressure. And that reminded me of a very interesting connected health device that you can purchase now if you don't already have one. And in fact, we bought a thermometer when all this started, because that's what we're doing. We're checking our temperatures 3-4 times a day as an early sign for the stay-at-home virus. I didn't buy this one though. If you haven't already heard of it, the Kinsa thermometer, it's a smart thermometer. It looks like a traditional stick under your tongue thermometer, has a little display on it, but it also takes your temperature information and goes to Kinsa Health. And Kinsa Health aggregates that. And if you go to healthweather.us, you can see a national US map of the Kinsa thermometer users, even down to the county level. And what they're doing is they're showing what maybe spikes in temperatures in certain regions, for example. And they're specifically saying this is not really predicting COVID-19, but it's a potential indicator. And I think that's brilliant. And I have no problem. I kind of wish I bought one of these thermometers. I have no problem putting that data up in the cloud with them, as long as, again, it is anonymized and aggregated in this way. And because of the new FDA rules with other devices, I thought about other wearables that could be used to kind of create a national health map that still respects our privacy. And I know I mentioned Garmin last week as we were talking about, where can you work out now that the gyms are closed? And I mentioned what my Garmin tracks. Mine has a pulse oximeter in it. So that would be very good data to have in this particular pandemic. If I'm not getting enough oxygen to my lungs and the Garmin is tracking that, that's a potential red flag for maybe testing for COVID. And it's not just the Garmin that I have, but the Vivo Smart 4, the Venue, the Phoenix line, and most of the Forerunner running watches have that. So, there's a pulse ox. I'm sure you could get a regular connected, single-purpose pulse oximeter, and that would be fine too. But another one, in fact, you tested the Spire tags, I believe.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
They track your respiration rate.
Exactly. So, and I looked into these a little bit more. They're actually sold out right now, but an 8-pack of tags, not cheap. They're $399. And if I recall correctly, you attach them to your clothing?
You attach them to your under things, and they can be washed.
Yes. Yes. And I think the only thing you have to replace is the batteries in those when the battery dies.
You actually replace the whole tag, but they are designed to be recyclable.
Gotcha. But just in some medical testing, when compared with a medical grade respiratory device, those tags had a 93 to 98% statistical correlation. So I'm not saying they're cheap, but I'm saying they seem to work well, right? So we could put that data into that national health map. And then there's so many trackers. Any decent tracker does heart rate, and some even do blood pressure. I'd say the Apple Watch probably has the largest chunk of data by any one wearable company right now. They could contribute to it. I know they're very privacy centric, and that's fine. This could be done in a way that's privacy centric, though, I think.
So let me ask you, because Kinza actually pulls aggregate data to tell companies zip codes where people are sick.
It does.
So companies like Clorox can say, hey, I want to sell Lysol to these zip codes and target them on Facebook. So Kinza does make that available. It's anonymized, so it's just zip code level, more people are sick, but they do sell that to third-party advertisers. Is that okay in our worldview?
So everybody's going to have a different opinion. I'll offer mine. If I'm sick or I'm in an area that's sick, it's in my interest and everybody else around me, their interest, to be disinfecting with those types of products. So I don't have a problem with that. I don't think we're ever going to get away from targeted ads. But if they're targeted ads that add public safety features and health value to the society at large, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Do you disagree? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. There are certain things like saying that I have a temperature that someone's sick is less intrusive than saying like, imagine selling advertising data about people's BMIs based on a scale and saying everybody in this county is fat. And then maybe their insurance rates go up, although everyone would know that people in that county are fat if they drive around. So there's some interesting implications there that
True.
I don't know that I'm okay with.
That implication is different than, say, ad targeting. That implication is for like company policy change.
True, but someone could say, for example, I want to advertise my job to people who are not fat for whatever reason. Let's say I want only attractive people, or maybe I don't want to take the health insurance hit. And so then I'm going to only advertise this job to people in these counties that don't have a high BMI. And then you're like, okay, we are way over time. So let's quickly go to the Internet of Things podcast hotline. On the hotline, every week, we answer your questions about smart home devices or other things, I suppose. Mostly we get smart home device questions. If you want to call and ask us a question, you can give us a shout at 512-623-7424 and leave us a voicemail. If you do this, you will be entered to win a Aware Glow C. That's this month's prize. And we will be picking that and announcing it next week. So if you call us before midnight ET on March 31st, you will be entered to win. I should also say that this week's question was actually submitted via email. Ken, who is our caller this week, he just recorded his own voice and sent it to us. So if you would like to do something like that, you totally could. We want to make this as inclusive as possible, and I know some people live outside the country. If you live outside the US or Canada, you cannot win the prize. Sorry, you guys. So feel free to do that. Now, let's hear the question.
Hi, Stacy and Kevin. This is Ken from Massachusetts. I have a quick question for you. I was wondering if you could give an update on the new Nest Aware subscription or pricing model. The one that is one price for your whole home. Thanks a lot for the great show. Really appreciate it.
Okay, Ken. I let Kevin tackle this because he currently has a Nest Aware subscription, and he's a former Googler and can navigate their labyrinthine policies here. So, Kevin.
Yeah, and it took quite a bit of navigating, and I should be upfront to Ken and everybody else that the new Nest Aware subscription is still not yet available as of the time of this recording. Google has said it will be available in early 2020, but as of now, it is still the old Nest Aware plan, and that is a per device plan. However, we can put a link in the show notes to a rather detailed support article from Google that explains the Nest Aware Plus plan, which is the new plan. It is not based on how many Nest devices you have. So if in the past, if you had a Nest Hello doorbell, 3 Nest cameras, and something else, you were going to pay per device. With the new plan, you will pay per household. So the pricing does go up because the least expensive monthly subscription currently available is $6 per month. With the new plan, it will be $12. However, the old plan gave you 30 days of event video history and not 24/7 video history, if that makes sense. You couldn't go back and look through and watch 24/7 of your cameras unless you paid additional fees. With the Nest Aware Plus plan, you will get 10 full days of 24/7 video history. You will also have not just 30 days of event history, but 60 days. You'll get the intelligent alerts, the sound detection, and the emergency calling features, which were part of the old plan. But the real difference here is you pay one monthly fee, or you can pay annually. It's $120, and you are covered for all of your devices, which I think makes sense, quite honestly, because people tend to pick an ecosystem, unlike Stacy and I, who have different cameras from different places for testing. If I had to pick one, for me, it probably would be Nest, and I would have 4 or 5 of those. And I'd be very happy that they're all covered under the new plan.
Yes. So, Kevin, thank you for explaining that. And Ken, hopefully this helps. Don't worry yet. When it happens, now you're prepared to decide if you want to sign up. All right. Remember, if you have a question, you can send it to us as an audio snippet to info@stacyoniot.com, or you can call us at 512-623-7424, and you'll be entered to win. And that concludes this portion of the show. Please stay tuned so you can hear and learn all about embedded security and learn how to segment out your network for IoT devices. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Machine Q, a Comcast service, and I have Michael Putterman here with me from Machine Q. Michael, just to get started, can you remind us what is Machine Q?
Machine Q is a Comcast service, and we help enterprises connect their operations through an integrated product suite of devices, gateways, and IoT management software. We provide 2 primary products today. Our infrastructure product includes a suite of IoT gateways, APIs, and our device and gateway management experience in Q Central. Our platform product is a portfolio of low-power sensing devices that can be layered on top of our infrastructure product.
And can you tell us about where Machine Q is going? What's coming down the road as we head into 2020?
A lot of customers have been really happy with our infrastructure and platform products. But one thing we're finding is that there is a group of customers that really want to buy solutions from Machine Q. So as we go into 2020, we will begin investing in full stack solutions that we can offer to our customers with a focus on temperature monitoring and asset tracking.
And what is an example of what this could mean for enterprises?
What this means for our enterprise customers is that they can work with MachineQ to provide a truly integrated full-stack solution experience. A recent example of this is that we worked with a Fortune 500 biotechnology company who was really interested in an indoor asset tracking solution to track expensive medical equipment throughout their laboratories. By working with MachineQ, we were able to deploy for them a hybrid LoRaWAN and Bluetooth asset tracking solution that helped solve their need. The solution provided the customer with near real-time, room-level information as to where an asset resided in their facilities, and this helped them avoid costly write-offs due to not being able to find expensive assets in their facilities.
That sounds cool, and asset tracking is a really big use case. What other problems was MachineQ able to solve for this particular customer?
For this particular customer, we also provided a variety of solutions to address some facility management challenges that the customer had. We provided temperature sensors for the monitoring of refrigerators and freezers, provided amperage clamps for energy monitoring, and water leak detectors to make sure that there weren't any costly leaks throughout their facilities. Additionally, we were also able to provide all of the software backend and frontend to bring all this information together into a comprehensive visualization and management platform for this customer.
Thanks, Michael, for sharing that. It does sound like you guys are really working hard to provide a fully realized solution for your clients. So where can our listeners find out more about MachineQ?
Our listeners can find out more at machineq.com/Stacy. That's machineq.com/STACEY.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Josh Datko, who is founder and principal engineer at Cryptotronics. Hello, Josh. How are you today?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I am excellent. So we should probably get this started with a sense of what you do at Cryptotronics.
Sure. So mainly what I do is both consulting and contracting for other embedded design firms, people making embedded devices to help them build secure products. So this takes usually two forms. On the design side, I help them kind of as a security architect, building security in the beginning. It also can look like on the end of the product design cycle where I do kind of a penetration test or an audit of their device to help that it's secure before it goes to market.
Got it. All right. We're going to talk about lots of things today, talking about embedded security, IT security. We're going to talk about definitions of like secure enclaves and things like that. But first, let's just give consumers advice. We have got so much conflicting information out there about connected devices. What would your advice be to someone who's interested in adopting these things and using these things, but really wants to make sure they're secure?
Sure. So I like to think about it as like three levels of security. There's a basic, a medium, and a high that consumers can do. So in the basic level is that when you buy any kind of connected device, you generally want to change the default password. So whatever you have the device, set the password from whatever admin or whatever the device ships with, change the password. Now, the next problem that usually comes with that is how do you remember that password you just set? And so a good advice, not just for IoT and connected devices, but for general security, is to use a password manager. Personally, I use 1Password, but there's others, LastPass, et cetera, that do similar things. And this really helps you just manage the million passwords you have to remember. So you only have to remember one. If you change that in the device, you set the password, use the password manager. You could also share it with your family in the software. And that's really the basic security that you should do. The medium level is then to turn on MFA or multi-factor authentication. And so what this is going to do is going to protect you. If an attacker is trying to log into your account, if you imagine you have a connected camera and an attacker is just trying to log into as many as possible, if you have MFA on, they need that second factor in order to log into that account. So it really is protecting your account and by extension of that, your devices so that they're harder to get into by just kind of guessing the password. If you have done those two things on a consumer level, you probably are using the device in the maximum recommended security configuration that the manufacturer is setting. So those are really the basic and the medium ways to do it. The kind of third level is really a high level of security that I don't think most consumers have to do. But in the light of this work from home era that we're entering, if you start to have work systems with your home systems, maybe this becomes more important. And this is basically to segregate your network so that you have work things on a work network and your maybe IoT things on a separate VLAN. And it gets a little detailed into network configuration. But the idea is you treat your home network like an enterprise and you take those enterprise best practices. I don't think that's necessarily required if you have done especially the first two things.
So along those lines, because we actually get a lot of questions from our audience who there is a great portion of them who I suspect are network engineers or some sort of incredibly technically savvy group. Go y'all. And we actually get a lot of questions about how to do this. And then also Kevin and I tried to separate our items out on a guest network. So he's using Google Wi-Fi. I'm using Eero. We both created guest networks, put all of our IoT devices on there. We're actually surprised by how porous the networks seemed. And I don't know if you have, is a guest network sufficient for doing this? Or do I need to buy a separate internet connection? Like, how far do I take this?
Yeah. So this is where, if you like doing this, this is a nice rabbit hole of technology to go down. And I can definitely appreciate, as network engineers, why they like doing this. But I'll just try to help describe my setup, which is not the way everyone can do it, but to show some of the challenges that can come up. And so personally, I use Unify equipment, which is just the vendor name from Ubiquiti. And it essentially is an enterprise level networking gear. A guest network, probably behind the scenes, is what it's doing is making separate VLANs or virtual LANs. And so with some of the higher end enterprise equipment, not only do I have a guest network, but I can segregate devices based on whether they're physically connected on Ethernet or Wi-Fi and have very advanced traffic routing features. So this is on some of the prosumer, I would say, equipment. I realize why some of this may be a little porous, because to really separate this, I think you have to have some of these advanced features. If you're using equipment and it really only gives you guest network, non-guest network, you may not have the ability to really have that detailed level control to truly separate the network. So it really depends on the vendor, I guess, is the answer. But if you keep getting more enterprise-like network, you end up having more control, and you can get really down into the weeds of where every packet is going.
Got it. Now, next follow-up question. Would you recommend that router makers add these features as people add more connected devices? And I guess now that we're all working from home, I don't know if this is something they can do with a firmware or a software update, but going forward, is this something that we should call for people to have available to them on their home networks?
So it gets tricky. And so, one of the challenges that I've had in my own home network is, one thing we could say is that, well, the router manufacturer should not only have a guest network, but an IoT network. And so you would set up all your devices on this IoT network. The problem that I immediately had is that when I wanted to connect to that device on my home network, I was on my home Wi-Fi and my IoT device was on a different network. And then now I couldn't talk to it unless I switched networks to the Things network, so to speak. And so I would have to break that level of separation, which is not great from a security perspective, just to use the Things network. So if they were to add it, I would imagine it would cause a decent amount of confusion unless it's done properly, where it can be like as easily as like a one-touch setup. So I don't know if we're there yet. I think the options are available if you're really into it. And like I said, try to get that enterprise level stuff. But it's still, I think, pretty tricky to do for regular consumers and not have a bunch of devices that don't work.
That was our take. So, okay. Well, I appreciate someone smarter than I am and who actually has done this, talking about that. So you're an embedded security expert, and I would love to understand what the difference is between embedded and traditional IT security.
Yeah, so they both have security in their name, so that's a good common between the two. But apart from that, there's a few things that separate why is embedded different than IT. And so if we think about traditional IT, and that could be cloud, it could be endpoint, like laptops in corporate environments, but a lot of them have essentially the idea that hardware is a commodity and that processing power is cheap. So you have very flexible software. You have a lot of monitoring capability, especially in a lot of cloud security, but it's kind of all built on commodity hardware. Embedded IoT, or even OT, like operational technology, industrial IoT, that's really the complete inverse. The hardware is not commodity. It's often custom built for a very specific application. So we have very specific hardware, which means it's a much more heterogeneous field. And the software, while there are some similarities, for example, embedded Linux is popular, but really that's where the similarities stop, because every silicon vendor is going to have their own fork of Linux. And so there's very specific differences. And so the security between those two looks a lot different. So in the traditional IT security, the security is a little more abstracted into software protections. In embedded security, the security really has to start with the hardware because it's a very hardware-focused industry. So we start with the hardware capabilities. How does hardware secure software? And it's just a different perspective of looking at the system.
Okay. And in IT security, basically in IT, we have come so far in this space because the whole goal in IT is figuring out how to let one person manage and handle an increasing number of devices, right? So you started out with, maybe one person could handle 10 servers. And now one person can handle, 100,000 servers, 100,000 laptops. In embedded, there are efforts to try to make that happen. And they need to happen if you think about we're going to stick all these sensors everywhere, right? But is that possible?
So you're right in that's exactly the IT approach. I think that the nature of embedded is that we can get there in some senses. So for example, if there is a particular sensor and that sensor is the same hardware, in that kind of microcosm of that particular sensor deployment, you can, for example, kind of treat the system as a cloud, right? So that the hardware is maybe less specific. But as a whole, and the reason the embedded industry exists is that we're custom building hardware to fix very specific solutions. So there are a few vendors who are trying to solve this. One that comes to mind is Balena OS, which is trying to abstract Linux-based embedded software, which they are using containers. But for example, that doesn't work when your embedded device doesn't run Linux. So I think there's some things that we can do to make this easier, but fundamentally embedded is different than how the cloud IT space works.
So you, in our previous conversations, have called for security engineers on product design. And I am very curious, what is the role and job of a quote unquote security engineer?
Yeah, so this is one area also where I think the embedded industry can improve. So an embedded security engineer, I say, is a mix of someone who knows firmware, hardware, security, and systems engineering. And that sounds like a lot, but the nature of the fact of embedded engineering, in order to be effective with that kind of security, you do kind of have to know a little bit of all those domains. The life cycle of an embedded security engineer would be at the beginning of a project, they're first acting kind of like a system architect. So they're taking in the requirements, they're helping design security in with the other system engineer to make sure that there's a secure foundation. And then as the product goes along its life cycle, they kind of transition into like a team lead. So as embedded hardware and software developers are implementing certain security features, they're there to kind of provide the oversight to make sure that it's meeting the security requirements. And then at the end of the project, they kind of act as an evaluator. So whether this would be like a first person or first party evaluation where they would be evaluating the product, making sure that the security requirements are met, and then possibly in addition to a first-party evaluation, they'd be helping coordinating a third-party evaluation where security is really critical before it ships.
Okay, so a lot of people, when they talk about security, they talk about it like something is secure or it's not. And I always feel like that's silly. Security is a spectrum. And depending on the type of job you're doing or job you're asking a connected device to do, or maybe the data that it's gathering, we really need to think about levels of security. And I would love for you to talk about how companies can assess threat models and risks that are really appropriate for them.
Threat modeling in general is a security term of art that basically means thinking about all the things that can go wrong, especially in the security domain. So this is actually, even though it has this name, threat modeling, it's actually something that I think is pretty common to engineers and consumers. When you get a hot water heater in your house, for example, one of the problems with a hot water heater is that it could overflow. If it overflows, maybe there is something that now they have these sensors that will detect the water spilling and automatically shut off the water. That is thinking about what's the worst case, what can go wrong. From a security point of view, what's the security twist on that analogy? Well, what if an attacker could stop that function from happening? So the attacker can somehow modify the control system so that when there is water, it doesn't shut off. And so that is kind of like the security spin on thinking about what can go wrong. And so even though threat modeling sounds like kind of this thing that's like in the domain of security engineers only, this is kind of the idea. And there's a few patterns that people can use to help them to conduct threat models, but it's really just formalizing what do you think you can go wrong. So a company, they actually have a couple different threats at a very high level. So if they're making a product, one threat is that who's attacking the product, and if they're providing connected service, there could be threats to them as a connected service. So there's essentially threats to the company. The second level is consumers are using that. So then the different perspective is, well, what are the threats to the consumer when the consumer has bought that? And sometimes those threats may actually be fighting one each other. So something that is protecting the consumer may, in fact, actually make to the company as a perceived threat. So a lot of times this comes up in something like a digital rights management or DRM. So the company may want to protect its software, but that maybe will make it hard for a consumer to maintain it, like a right to repair kind of thing. So the perspective of who is doing the threat modeling often helps drive, what those threats are.
Okay. And for the most complicated part of the show, I would say, this particular interview, let's talk definitions. I write generally, when I'm talking about security, and especially device-level security, about chips. And one of the things that I look for is a secure enclave, or maybe it's a trusted execution environment. There's a lot of vocabulary floating around out there, and it's unclear sometimes what all of this means. So let's start with my favorite, which is secure enclave. What the heck is that?
Definition game shows, my favorite game. So secure enclave, you've picked a good one to start with because there's actually, I don't think, a very clear definition. If you're confused, then everyone else is confused as well. Typically, what a secure enclave means is that it's a dedicated chip. So it's a separate piece of silicon that is separate from the main processor. And that chip or that IC is performing some sort of security functions. Where you'll typically see this is coming from like the payment industry. Well, they'll have a separate coprocessor that will handle the cryptographic functions in order to participate in the payment system. And so this has traditionally been called the secure enclave. As the industry has added more different ICs and more different chips, that name has kind of floated around to any other chip that may perform a function like that. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a consensus on what that means, but I would say in general, it's a separate chip that performs some cryptographic operation.
Okay, and let's go with something like a trusted execution environment. Dun, dun, dun.
Yes. So T's, trusted execution environment, they are in general on the same silicon as your main processor. So where one of the early trusted execution environments was ARM Trust Zone. And so ARM Trust Zone used to apply to what was called ARM Trust Zone Cortex-A, which is just the application series ARM Cortex. And it would have a technology such that your main OS was running, and then you would flip into so it's still on the same processor, but essentially the code flips into this trusted environment, and then that code, which would be running in the trusted execution environment, is running at a higher privilege than the code that was running before. So it's just a trick. It's a hardware trick. At the end of the day, they're setting one bit on the address bus to say whether it's trusted or non-trusted. But the key is it's happening on the same silicon. So ARM Trust Zone, that's the ARM version. To an extent, you could probably group in Intel SGX into that as well. The key point there versus secure enclaves is that it's on the same die versus different.
Okay, and ARM actually has moved those down to their MCUs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what about a TPM, which is a trusted platform module?
So the TPM was also made by another TLA, or three-letter acronym, from the Trusted Computing Group, or TCG. The Trusted Computing Group got together and they came up with the specification for what is now known as a TPM. And so the one that was most popular a few years ago was TPM 1.2. And this is a discrete chip, so kind of like a secure enclave, which is why this gets confusing. So it is a discrete chip, but unlike a secure enclave, it performs a very specific set of functions as defined by the TPM spec. And so practically where you see TPMs are in x86 environments, so think laptops. And then even more practically, that what the TPM can provide, especially for Windows, is the ability to use BitLocker, which is the full disk encryption suite with your encryption keys being backed by the TPM. So a TPM, I think some people would maybe disagree with this classification, but if you were to say secure enclave is the general term, TPM is a more specific instance of a secure enclave. And now there is TPM 2.0, which is just the upgraded, newer, better version of TPM, but that's typically where you see TPMs.
Got it. And are there any other weird TLAs that I should know about for security purposes?
As far as hardware is concerned, I think those are the major ones.
Awesome. All right. Well, Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. I really appreciate both your concrete advice and those definitions.
Sure. Not a problem. Happy to be here.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.